Rogue. One of the other pillars of an ARPG, MMORPG, just plain old RPG, is something that's coming back to Diablo 4, and during the Diablo franchise has taken multiple shapes, from an actual rogue in Diablo 1 to assassin, and kind of Amazon a little bit in Diablo 2, Demon Hunter in Diablo 3, and I think that's all the Diablo games, yes. And now in Diablo 4 it's coming back to kind of take all of the stuff that you liked, hopefully, and make it into an even better class. And although we do kind of theme these videos about what is the best class, is Rogue the best class, I honestly think that design-wise Rogue might be the best class in Diablo 4, if not at least for bosses, which if you really think about, that's, you know, the biggest wall that you have to overcome in a Diablo game. And this time around, Rogue is even better. You'd obviously have a couple of playstyles that you might recognize. Marksman is definitely the Demon Hunter version of Diablo 3, with a bunch of skills from the Amazon in Diablo 2, where you just fire arrows and crossbows and bows and all of that stuff from afar. Cutthroat is more of a rogue style playstyle theme, where you just use your blades to go around and just melee targets and, you know, do all sorts of roguey things. And not to mention that both of these can be augmented either with each other or specifically with traps and other abilities that you might recognize from Assassin in Diablo 2. And more than just this, you can even imbue your abilities to do elemental damage or magic damage or whatever it is called in Diablo 4. It's essentially shadow, poison, and cold damage, or one of these. This is really cool. Not to mention you have specializations, which is the rogue unique mechanic that I will go over in a couple of minutes. But to start off, if you're going to be picking a rogue, what you can expect, like a little bit of a brief preview. Let's see what you're going to be using to face the forces of hell. First of all, you will start with a couple of choices in your basic skills, whether you want to go Marksman or Cutthroat. Marksman essentially has Puncture, Heartseeker, and Forceful Arrow. Each of these being range abilities where you shoot different stuff. For instance, Puncture, you throw your blades a short distance, so not as long as other ones, and every third attack you slow enemies down. While Heartseeker, you fire an arrow that seeks an enemy. It's kind of like a homing mechanic, you will remember this from Diablo 2. And you deal a little bit of damage and increase your critical strike, increasing with each ability use. And Forceful Arrow, you fire a powerful arrow at an enemy, dealing damage, and every third cast you will make your enemy vulnerable, which is a mechanic that essentially makes the enemy take more damage, and you can find this vulnerable stat baked into other abilities as well, not just Forceful Arrow. And of course, you will still have your melee abilities if you desire to go in melee with Invigorating Strike and Blade Shift. Invigorating Strike is a simple one where you melee an enemy, dealing damage and increasing your energy regeneration, which is your resource, not mana or hatred or discipline that we had in Diablo 3, I believe. It's energy. Simple. Just energy. Blade Shift is going to be a more interesting ability where you do less damage than the other ones so far, but for 3 seconds you can move freely through enemies. Collision in combat is definitely something very akin to Diablo, specifically with the style of content and templates and zones that they design, because most of them are very tight, very narrow, very claustrophobic, and they are packed with a lot of mobs. So you might find yourself in sticky situations sometimes where you're just surrounded by mobs, specifically since you will have abilities that will make you dash around, which we will get to in a second. So this just helps you with that situation, which is really cool. And you cannot have your basic rotation without core abilities as well that consume your energy. First of all, Barrage is another marksman ability where you unleash a barrage of 5 arrows that expand outwards, dealing damage and ricocheting off of enemies. Deal a portion of the damage. Definitely really awesome for clearing large packs of monsters. Rapid Fire, similar-ish. You fire 5 arrows, dealing damage on each arrow clearly, and you can augment this, of course, as with any other ability. Penetrating Shot will make it so that you fire an arrow that pierces through all enemies in a line, dealing decent amount of damage. This is very satisfying to use, and there are some cool legendaries and effects that we've been able to also test with this on the beta servers. And those are the marksman abilities. What about the Cutthroat abilities? Well, you have Flurry, where you unleash a flurry of stabs and slashes, striking enemies in front of you for 4 times so far, and dealing a lot of damage to each target struck. Really cool, very akin to a rogue style playstyle. Twisting Blades has caught the eye of a lot of people, and you impale an enemy with your blades, dealing a lot of damage and making them take increase damage from you while they were impaled. And after 1 second, the blades return to you, piercing them for almost double that damage, which is really cool. Definitely a unique mechanic, and using this properly will let you mow through monsters left and right. And now we start to get to some of the abilities that make Rogue such a unique class to play, so much different than any other melee, specifically Barbarian, since you do get a lot of mobility abilities within the agility node, which kind of makes sense, right? You start with Shadow Step. Wall players, everybody? You become unstoppable and quickly move through the shadows to stab your enemy from behind for a lot of damage, and you gain increased movement speed for a couple of seconds afterwards. Definitely to go in or go out of a pack. If you're in a big pack of monsters, you can just Shadow Step to one that's outside, maybe an archer, maybe a ranger, something, or a caster, and you get out of the sticky situation and take down that particular target. Really cool, definitely helps in dungeons. Dash is probably very self-explanatory, where you dash forward and slash enemies for damage. It's a little bit less damage than the other abilities, but it is the mobility ability that I mentioned, and you have 2 charges baseline, probably augmented even further by legendaries that we don't know of yet. Dash is obviously really cool. It helps you do a lot of the mechanics in boss fights that kind of really trash other classes like Barbarian and maybe Shapeshifter Druid, which neither of these two have this much mobility. And to finish it off, not a Cutthroat or a Marksman ability, you have Caltrops, which is your first trap ability that you have access to. Also on 2 charges, you leap backwards and throw Caltrops on the ground, dealing very little, okay damage, not very little, it's okay damage, and you slow enemies by 50%. This is obviously really cool, very similar to what we kind of know from Diablo 3 and let's say the Demon Hunter version in Heroes of the Storm. We might be personally familiar with that concept, and obviously with 3 of these abilities, go in, go out, go in, go out, this makes Rogue such a fun class to play and engage with all the boss mechanics out there, giving you probably the best utility kit to manipulate encounters to your liking. Moving forward, we start to get to some of the cool abilities that Rogue has, if some of these weren't cool already. Concealment makes you vanish from sight, gaining an advanced form of stealth for 4 seconds. They'll not be removed by taking damage. Concealment also makes you unstoppable and grants you movement speed and allows you to move freely through enemies for its duration. Unstoppable is a mechanic that essentially makes you immune to crowd control effects, slows, stuns, fears, all of that stuff. You are immune to it, so you can, again, get out of a sticky situation or sneak past some mobs if that's your thing. Dark Shroud is also another 20-second cooldown so far, unless this gets changed, where you surround yourself with up to 5 protective shadows. You gain 8% damage reduction per active shadow, which is quite a bit if it stacks up, and each time you take direct damage, that damage is reduced and a shadow is consumed. Very cool defensive, especially if you're going to be playing heavy into melee. Smoke Grenade, you throw a smoky concoction at enemies that dazes them for 4 seconds. And last but not least, Poison Trap, again another trap, clearly. You place a trap that arms after 1 second. It activates when an enemy moves within range, applying a lot of poison damage over 9 seconds to enemies in the area, and you can have a maximum of 4 armed traps out at once so far. And with the Poison Trap, we start to get into the abilities for Rogue that deal, I guess, magic damage. And it's more obvious to see this with the Imbues, or Imbuement skills, rather. The first one on the list is Shadow Imbuement, where you imbue your weapons with festering shadows. Your next 2 imbuable skills deal shadow damage and infect enemies for 6 seconds. Infected enemies explode on death, dealing a little bit of damage to all surrounded enemies. If the infection expires before the enemy dies, it deals that damage just to that enemy alone. Clearly meant for AoE and mob clears and do big damage in dungeons. The next imbuement will be the Cold one, where you imbue your weapons with frigid energy. Your next 2 imbuable skills deal cold damage and chill enemies for 25% per hit. Obviously, going into the cold skills, you'll also have access to vulnerable abilities, which is very akin to cold mechanics if you've been playing Sorcerer as well, although to be fair, Shadow has Vulnerable as well. But what Shadow doesn't have is the option to freeze enemies, which I guess freeze is kind of a stun, I suppose, since the mobs won't be able to do anything while they are frozen. And last but not least, Poison Imbuement makes it so you imbue your weapons with lethal poison. Your next 2 imbuable skills deal poison damage and apply 70% of their base damage as additional poison damage over 5 seconds. And I mentioned a bunch of these imbuable skills. Not all skills, of course, can work with these imbuements, and you'll notice this once you talent them and put them onto your bars. And it wouldn't be a Diablo 4 class without actual ultimate skills. Rain of Arrows is the marksman ability where you rain arrows down in a large area 2 times, and each wave deals a lot of damage. This is currently a 60-second cooldown, so we will see if this changes. I would expect legendaries to augment this because this looks really cool, and I want to cast this more than once a minute. Death Trap, yet another trap. You place a trap that arms after 1 second. It activates when an enemy moves within its target, dealing a total of a lot of damage to each enemy in the area. This is big. Obviously, as a trap playstyle, you get to manipulate the environment and the encounter to your liking. And last but not least, coming back from, I believe, Diablo 2, I don't think we've had this ever since, Shadow Clone. Another 60 seconds, you summon a shadow that mimics your actions for 15 seconds and deals 60% of your damage. This was so cool back in the day when I used to play it, and I'm so glad they brought this back. Now, I don't know how good this will be. It says mimics your actions. The extent to which this will be valid is very heavily down to what they will allow this to do. So far, from what we know, from what we see, from what we read in the tooltips, it kind of works on all of the things. Although we do need to test a little bit more, because obviously during the beta and the server slams, we didn't really have access to all of the abilities, and of course not all the legendaries as well. But this could be really cool if there are essentially no limitations on what the Shadow Clone can do. And to finish it off, the Specialization is the unique mechanic for Rogue, where this is something that you will have to choose between 3 different specializations, kind of very similar to other RPGs, but this is just specifically for Rogue. Now, Specialization in Diablo 4 for the Rogue makes it so that you can alter your gameplay to give you specific bonuses. The first specialization you unlock is at level 15, and that is combo points. Again, similar to what we had in Diablo 2, very similar to World of Warcraft and other style of RPGs, where your basic abilities now generate combo points up to 3, and certain skills consume combo points for additional effects, and usually those are the core skills unless there are legendaries or Paragon nodes that will ever change this. At level 20, you unlock Inner Sight. Inner Sight makes it so that when you attack marked enemies, you fill up your Inner Sight gauge, and when it is full, you gain unlimited energy for 4 seconds. Yes, this sounds really cool, and one that we sadly didn't have access to on the server slams and on the previous betas would be the Preparation specialization that is only unlocked at level 30. We don't really know much about this. I mean, we've had inceptions of this in other Blizzard games, so we can probably draw some conclusions, but not all the things work the same in all of the games. So this is for both you and us to discover once the game releases. Now, all of this, in terms of design-wise, makes Rogue, honestly right now, like no clickbait or anything, what I believe to be maybe the best class design for Diablo. And it is actually surprisingly one of my least played classes, and I still think it's probably the best design class. You are essentially a toolkit of options to deal with different encounters, from mobility, from traps that manipulate zones and area and terrain, from range attacks that can just give you all of the safe that you need and all the damage that you need from range, or melee abilities that can just mow down all of the mobs inside while keeping you safe and, you know, deceitful and subtle at the same time, with a lot of clones and decoys and all of that stuff. This is amazing. They're essentially taking all of the Rogue concepts that have been cool over the years and putting them into one class. Is this enough for you to play it at launch to be your, I don't know, main class? Or will you play this as an alt? I will definitely be playing Rogue as an alt, but I'm still debating if it's going to take over my main option. Let us know what your choices will be down in the comment section below, and thank you for watching the video. We will see you in the next one.